Hand tools. We're going to talk about all of the different type of hand tools we use in the sheet metal class. Various different things, no particular order. We're going to tell you what they're called. We're going to explain how we use them, give you a few basic safety rules to go with them. This is just a brief introduction. As we start using these, we'll go into more detail how we can be safe and careful with all of these. So let's start with the fun one. Let's start with some hammers. We've got several different kinds of hammers. The most common one we're going to use is called a ball peen hammer. This is the ball peen hammer. Flat face, rounded end on the back, wood handle, pretty standard. Whenever we're using a hammer, we do want to make sure we're using it near the end. As we've talked about in some of our other videos, if we're using a hammer like this, you're really not getting anything done. It's just very ineffective. We don't get much done ever. We do want to be very careful that we don't ever strike two hammers together on the face. The metal that we're made out of, hardened metal, can crack. I do have a hammer hanging on my wall, some of you guys have seen, where this part has just cracked from repeated use. So again, this is the ball peen hammer. We use it for bending, flattening metal, lots of different uses. That's probably the most common one we use. We do have a smaller ball peen hammer as well. We've got two other hammers. We have a better get them right. Tack hammer, rounded, the back end comes to a point, and we have a riveting hammer, square, back also comes to a point, kind of like a chisel. We can also use these for general metalworking as well. All of these three hammers will work just fine for anything we need to do. So those are our hammers. We use the hammers with a few different tools. We have several different punches. We've got those three punches. We've got a chisel, and we also have a couple of these. So all of these tools can be used with the hammer. They do different things. We're going to talk about them individually for a minute. So let's start with this guy right here. This is called a center punch. We've mentioned this in one of our other videos already. The back end is struck with the hammer. If we had a piece of metal, we would tap on that. Just a small dent. This is not for making holes. This is for putting a small dent in a piece of metal. And in particular, we use it to mark where the center of a hole is going to be. So if we were going to drill or punch a hole in a piece of metal, we would tap, put a dent. That makes it very easy for the drill bit to fall into that dent and stay where it needs to be to drill an accurate hole. And if we were to look at this point, that point is actually 90 degrees. It's a perpendicular line, okay, but we've got it kind of tilted like this, so it's not very pokey. This one, on the other hand, this is called a prick punch, and you'll notice that the prick punch is quite a bit steeper. This one is the one we use for staking. When we're making a hand grooved seam, we use this to lock pieces together. They are supposed to be painted. The paint is worn off, about due for another coat. Center punch is blue, prick punch is red. Okay. This one, and again, both of these, neither one is used to punch holes. This guy with the flat tip, this is the one we use to punch holes. All right? So this is called a pin punch. We use this on a piece of metal to punch a circular hole out of the metal. We could, if we had a square punch, we could do it the same way. We could punch square holes. The trick to using this is, if we have a piece of metal, we can't just put it down over on our vise and hammer on it. It's just going to mush the metal. We need something soft under the metal. So we have a piece of wood that we set down, we set the piece of metal on top of it, we line this up where we want it to go, and then we hammer this through the metal, and it pushes out a little circular piece that usually ends up getting stuck in the wood. Again, this is called a pin punch. And all of these punches, and the rest of them we're going to talk about, we do need to be careful of mushrooming. So the back end, as we hammer on these, again, metal is kind of like Play-Doh, it gets mushed, and as it gets mushed, it spreads out. You can see on this one, it's starting to mushroom a fair bit. We don't have any cracks or splits in it, but this is one we should probably bring up to me. I will grind that back down so it looks something like this. Okay? This one is like a punch, but this is called a chisel. We hammer on the back of it just like we would with a hammer. It's got a kind of sharp tip. We use it like we would the pin punch. We put something soft underneath the metal. We put a piece of wood down, and we can use it this way and hammer and use it to actually cut metal, or we can put it this way, and in the case of a rivet, if we have a rivet head or something that's sticking out of a piece of metal, we can cut it off that way. Okay, so again, that's called a cold chisel. These other two guys have different purposes. I'm going to save this one for a few minutes. We're going to show you that because it does something else that we have different ways to do. This is called a hand groover. And as we saw in one of our earlier videos, the hand groover is used to mush pieces of metal together in a seam. So if we have a seam where we've bent a piece of metal over, we bent another piece of metal over, and we hooked them together, we have the option of a regular seam where it kind of steps up, or we can use this hooked on mash to mash that down on both sides so it's flat on the bottom and bumped on one side, as we see in our joining lab videos. So again, this one is starting to mushroom a little bit. We should probably grind that guy down too. So if we push those to the side, let's talk about these two. These two do almost the same thing. This is called a rivet gun, and this is called a rivet set. They are both used to install rivets. With this one we use pop rivets. This is a pop rivet. With this one we use standard rivets. This is a standard rivet. Just a little piece of soft iron. So the way the rivet gun works, if we undo that latch, we take this little thing here. It looks like a little toy sword. The blade of the sword is going to wind up being scrap. The handle is the only part that actually does anything. The blade of this little toy sword goes in the rivet gun, and then we would have two pieces of metal that we've punched holes in. So this would go through the first hole and the second hole. So both pieces are put together, and then when we squeeze this, that little ball on the end of the handle is going to get pulled through the handle. And when it does, this handle piece actually gets fatter and it clamps. So if you watch that while I squeeze it, you can see it's starting there. And if we keep going, it's going to pull those two pieces together. Now it didn't quite break off the blade yet, so I'm not done, and right now the teeth are still kind of clamped. So the easiest way to do this is to let the handle all the way out. Now it slides just fine. And we slide it all the way in again. We can clamp it, and we keep going until it breaks the blade off. So the blade is still in there. Here's the blade. This is scrap. The rivet looks like this. So if we compare these two, we've got an installed, well, if it was installed, it's much shorter and fatter compared to the unused rivet. So that's the Rivet Gun. The Rivet Set does the same thing with this. So if you notice, this looks like the handle of the rivet, the pop rivet. There's no blade though. So we kind of have to do it manually. This end right here gets mushed, and when we hammer on it, it swages it, so it's pushing it down and it's mushing it out. Remember, it's like Play-Doh. The way this works is very similar. If we set that down on an anvil, we put our two pieces of metal where the hole is, we put them both over that. We start with this small hole. The rivet should fit in that hole. We have different sizes of rivet sets, and we use that small hole to push the two pieces of metal together. Okay, so we're going to push the two pieces of metal together, and then we switch over to this side, and you'll notice it does not go all the way down. So when we hammer on the back of this, it's going to mush this down and clamp those two pieces of metal together. So Rivet Set and Rivet Gun. What should we do next? Ooh, here's a fun tool. Kind of has to do with rivets. This is a Cleco plier, and this is a Cleco. It's not a bullet. It's got a spring in there, and this silver piece is a button. It's really hard to push down, so we use these pliers. The Cleco fits in there like this, and the pliers will squeeze that, and when it does, it pops these out. And if you can see that tip, when it's popped out, it's small. And when I let it go, that middle piece spreads those two parts out. So this is a clamp. It's a temporary clamp. So the Cleco and the Cleco pliers we use before we install pop rivets. We can assemble a whole project with nothing but Clecos, make sure everything fits. We can take it all back apart when we're ready to finish it, and then we install the pop rivets. Let's talk about some measuring tools. This is called a combination square. We can measure with it. We've got centimeters on that side, inches on this side. We can do perpendicular lines with it. We can do 45-degree lines with it. We can also use this side as a center finder. So if we have something round, we can place it in the middle here. For example, this handle. If I put that in the middle there, and I were to draw a line along the straight edge, turn it, draw another line, do that 2, 3, 4 times, the lines should all cross in the middle. So that's a combination square. A few other measuring instruments we have. Obviously the steel rule. We've been using those for a while now. We've got these two guys. These are measuring instruments. These are outside calipers. These are inside calipers. We use this to measure the outside of something. For example, this round piece right here, it's pretty hard to put a ruler across that, but we can screw these in until it just barely fits. Ooh, see, that's a little tight. All right, so we've got that. We can now set that on a ruler and read the measurement. This is the same thing, but the opposite. It fits into holes. So if we wanted to measure inside here, we could screw that in until it just barely fit inside there, pull it out, measure that gap. So those are both measuring tools. Last measuring tool we're going to talk about is this guy right here. This is called a sheet metal gauge. So every little slot in here is a different thickness. And we can measure, so for example, this ruler, if I find one that it fits in, so getting a little tighter, ooh, it just barely fits in that one. We'll see if it fits in the next one. It does not fit in the next one. So if we read that right there, it says 24 gauge. So this steel rule is 24 gauge. Gauge is a thickness. So we can use that to measure thickness clear up to this big guy right here, which is 0 gauge. That's our last measuring tool. Oh, let's talk marking tools for a second. These are both the same thing, just different kinds. These are both scratch-alls. They're very pointy, very sharp. We use these kind of like we would a pencil when we're laying things out on a piece of metal. So with our ruler, we scratch lines. We can draw curves, we can write our name. These are great tools, but obviously we do have to be careful because they're sharp. This is called a divider. It's got a thumb screw that allows us to lock in and make it tight. So we can set this on a ruler and adjust it to a measurement, and we can use it to draw parallel lines. So I could hook this on the edge here and scratch a line all the way down the edge of a piece of metal. So we can save all kinds of time using this instead of marking 2 arrows and scratching a line. We can also use it to draw curves. If we measure this and set it to a radius, we can use it just like we would a compass, and we can draw arcs or circles on metal. Again, very sharp. They should be sharp. If they're not, let me know and I can sharpen both this, the divider, and the scratch-alls. They need to be sharpened. Here's a fun one. This is a hole punch. Very similar to this guy. This is the pin punch. These do the exact same thing. Sometimes this does a better job, sometimes this does a better job. It depends on what we're using it for. This is a handheld hole punch. It has a punch on the top here and a die on the bottom. We do need to be careful because your fingers can get very close and you can smash fingers on this one. So very good idea to, as you start, when you get it ready to go, we put our fingers out and push it down. Sometimes it doesn't work. So if this is not working, the die on the bottom here, usually it's not working because it's kind of falls out. So if it's not working, screw that in so the die is sticking out just a little bit, and it should work just fine. All right, this wide mouth pair of vice grips is called a hand seamer. We can use this to make bends in metal, places where our box and pan brake won't reach. We've got another style over in the cabinet. They're green in color, but this would clamp on the metal. Usually we hang the metal over an edge, and then we would end it while we're pushing down to try and get a nice tight bend. So again, those are called a hand seamer. Getting close. Hopefully you know what this is. It's called a file. We've got a handle on it. These should never be used without a handle. And of course, we want to keep our oil away from these. This file is in pretty rough shape. Files are made out of a very high carbon steel, which chips and breaks very easily. It does not bend. If you drop this, it's probably going to break teeth off. But when we file, we only put the effort into it when we're pushing away. Drawing back doesn't do any cutting. So that, again, that's a file. Let's talk aviation snips. Look at that mess. These are also in very sorry shape. A lot of our locks have bent and fallen off. These should be all latched. This one's completely broken, so we need to do something about that. These are called Aviation snips. We've got 3 different styles. We have center cutting, we've got left and right cutting. Metal is not quite like paper. When you cut paper, the paper just kind of flows and falls off on either side. When we cut metal, we're bending one side up. So the center cutting is designed so it bends both sides a little bit. It bends one side down while it's bending one side up. These other 2 will bend either the left side up and leave this side flat, or it will bend the right side up and leave this side flat. Okay? Now, I got this pair to show you. These are over there. I need to just get rid of them. These are identical. These are both cut the same way, but you notice the silver tips? The reason I hang on to these are really good, sharp snips. The black bladed ones, not so much. I really should just get rid of them. They do not cut well at all. So don't use the black bladed ones, use the ones with silver blades. So Aviation snips, very handy. We do use those a fair bit. We can also use these. These are called tin snips. They are very similar to the Aviation snips. A little harder on the hands though. A little more unpleasant to use. Okay, it's a cutting tool. Last tool we're going to talk about today, this is called a hacksaw. Hacksaw is used for cutting metal. The teeth should always point forward. So like the file, this only cuts on the forward stroke. We don't want to go really fast when we're using the hacksaw. We don't want to use just a small area. We want nice long strokes, spreading the heat out. If we go really fast, it can get the blade hot in one area and it can actually crack the blade. I've seen that happen many times. More common is it starts to rip teeth off of the blade, and then we've got one dead spot and the rest of the blade hasn't been used at all. So hacksaw, used for cutting metal. All of these tools are located in our metal locker over locker number 4. Should be pretty easy to see. They're all hung up right there for you. If you're having a hard time figuring out where something goes, let me know and we can get you situated. All right, that's our really brief introduction to a whole bunch of tools which we're going to learn how to use. Let's start using them.